Fareed Zakaria, author of PostAmerican World. What a splash. I said to my kids, just read the book. So I want my royalty check. Come on out here, Fareed. And the kids read it. How many copies did you sell?
We sold a lot, 250,000 in hardcover, and it's now in 30 translations all over the world.
What's released too? What's the difference besides a complete rewrite?
Basically, what I realized was that the two big things that happened since I wrote the book. One was the financial crisis, and the other was the election of Barack Obama. And so I felt that the book, even though it had predicted many of the things that happened, felt stale in some ways, because it wasn't taking into account those events. And the most important one is, of course, the financial crisis, because the financial crisis powerfully accelerated the forces I was describing in the book. Basically, what the financial crisis did was it took Western growth rates and depressed them.
Right.
They're going to be depressed probably for a decade.
The new normal. Do you like the phrase "the new normal"?
I do. I do. I think Mohammed Al-Arian is a very smart guy, and I think he gets exactly what's happened, which is that you've suppressed growth rates in the Western world, but in the emerging markets, they're pretty much back on track. So if you look at the date by which China will overtake the United States as the largest economy in the world, that's moved forward almost 10 years.
You look at the paradigm, the synergy, all these phrases. So Victor, come on over here. And I just brought up here something you read and I read, Foreign Affairs, a wonderful magazine, the Council on Foreign Relations. What is the linkage here of this crisis? You added the linkage here of diplomacy and the politics you do every day with CNN and GPS, linking that into what I do, which is economics. What's the state now of the diplomatic dialogue?
Well, I'll give you one example of it, which is, I think, probably the most profound. The financial crisis and everything that it did has completely changed the way in which countries like China look at the world. So a Chinese official says to me, and this is in the book, the Chinese official says to me, we used to think that the United States had the most advanced form of finance capitalism in the world. And we were the students, you were the teachers. We now look up like we're like the smartest kid in the class who suddenly realized the teacher didn't know what he was talking about.
I like that.
And he says, look back over the last 10 years, look at how you handled your economic policy, look at how we handled ours. You guys had, we had growth, so we raised interest rates to tamp down the growth. We tightened consumer credit so that consumers didn't get overextended. And we accumulated a budget surplus because we knew that were going to be bad times and we needed the cash. What did you guys do? You lowered interest rates, you eased up on consumer credit,
and broke every rule.
You broke your budget. So the Chinese look at that, and when it comes to climate change in Copenhagen, when it comes to issues regarding Iran, all of a sudden they feel like you guys don't know what you're talking about. The myth of American competence and the myth that we had the only model that worked has been shattered.
The myth of confidence, and I love this quote, page 259, no one in Asia wants to live in a Chinese-dominated world. There is no Chinese dream to which people aspire. That's a single quote in the book. What does Asia dream in if they're not going to dream in the myth of America?
See, this is why people look at the book and the title and they think it's a book about doom and gloom and America's on the way out. It's not. It's a more complicated world, and that quote perfectly illustrates it. The reality in Asia is that they are partly attracted to the West. They are partly trying to create their own cultural traditions, their own economic system, and it's a hodgepodge. If you talk to somebody in India, they regard the rise of China with enormous apprehension and fear. You talk to somebody in Indonesia, they're looking at it and thinking, well, economically it's good for us because we can ride the Chinese economy, but politically we don't want to be suffocated by China. So the United States, in both economic and military political terms, has a vital role to play there.
I interviewed President Clinton at one point here a year or so ago with his Clinton Global Initiative, and I mentioned your idea of a new America where we need to look out and generate a multilateral set of relationships. What's the scorecard in the last 12 months besides the drama of Pakistan?
Look, I think that the Obama administration seems to get this new world, certainly more than Bush did. And if you look at the Libyan operation, I think that's an interesting role model for the future, where Obama says, look, our interests are not directly engaged here, but if the Arab League asks us, if these Libyan civilians ask us, if the UN endorses it, and if the Europeans say they'll do the heavy lifting, we'll play our part. But we're not going to go in guns blazing, because guess what? We don't want to own Libya. And so that's an interesting model because going forward, if the United States is the only actor, the only country that's going to have to pay all the bills, do all the fighting, it's not going to happen. So you've got to find some way to make the international system work where we don't always have to play the main role.
Let's come back. Let's tell us where we are. They're our litmus paper. They tell us the view right now, and they tell us of a continuing tension. We've moved from subprime to sovereign solvency, and the political responses to this sovereign insolvency. What do you expect to see in Europe? What will be the outcome of Europe?
Europe is trapped. I mean, everyone has described the dilemma. And you see the tension basically between Germany and the ECB. The Germans feel like we can't just keep writing these checks forever. We don't have enough leverage over the Greeks. They're not reforming enough. And the ECB says, yes, but the contagion effect is too dramatic. I think at the end of the day, the ECB will win. The problem with default is this. I can make the case for default or restructuring in isolation. But you tell me what happens to all the money in Portuguese, Irish, Spanish banks the day after the Greek, and where it all goes to Germany. So what you will do is you will destroy the European financial system. If you can solve that problem, default is fine. But I don't see a solution to that. So what that means is, kicking and screaming, the Germans will have to cut the checks. But it will depress growth in Europe. It's back to the themes of the book. At the end of the day, Europe and the United States, because of sovereign debt issues and private debt issues, are going to be performing subpar for a decade.
Did you take Western Civ freshman year? You were at Yale, right?
Yeah, I was.
I don't know what percentage of college students today take the Western Civ you and I took, but it's got to be way too small.
It's very small.
Western civilization, Professor Huntington says, is precious not because it is universal, because it is unique. Can Asia consider our Western civilization and take the positive parts of that?
Well, this is the great challenge the Asians see. The Asians look at it and I think they say, Neil Ferguson calls it the killer apps. You guys had a bunch of killer apps that allowed you to grow. What was it? It was the scientific method. It was education. It was the free market. It was private property, the rule of law, right? Okay, now they're open source. We're going to try and copy those. And to a large extent, the ones that have done it well, like Singapore, Hong Kong, South Korea, Taiwan, have flourished. The real question is, can the giants do it? Can India and China do it? I think so far they've been able to, but things change when you get to about $10,000 per capita GDP. In other words, when you're at $2,000 per capita GDP, the government just has to stop being brain dead and you'll be able to grow the economy. But once you get up into the $7,000, $8,000 per
where
capita,
China is about now.
It's about getting there, right? That's when you start having to modernize your legal system. You have to start modernizing your financial system. You've got to start, there's a whole bunch of stuff you need to do, and we don't know that China will be able to make that transition.
From Newsweek, bring this up here if you would. Niall Ferguson from Harvard, the best option is to be Switzerland, a country ignored by that guy from Princeton. The Swiss have run a prudent fiscal policy throughout the crisis. Too bad American presidents never visit Switzerland. I think that's great. They never visit Switzerland, do they?
But here's the thing. I mean, Neil is absolutely right. But the key there was that they accumulated a surplus before the crisis.
They did the proper economics.
They and the Chinese and the Brazilians were properly counter-cyclical. In boom times, you run surpluses. People forget Dwight Eisenhower. Eisenhower is the best economic president we've had. He had 8 years of the presidency. 4 years he ran a budget surplus. 4 years he ran a deficit.
What does that say then, elite guy from the East Coast? You personify the whole elite coast education. Here's a basic guy from Kansas who was an Army general and got things done, and you call him our best economic policy. But what does it say about that bedrock American value?
It says that the most important thing is not, we all know what the right thing to do is. It's having the discipline to do it. That when times are good, don't lower interest rates, don't try to goose growth. That's the moment where you accumulate surplus. That's when you keep a little cash in the bank. But we've lost that discipline. It's not smart.
This is critical. Where did that discipline go?
We've become, the culture has been, we've lost that puritanical, kind of that old high wasp Protestant ethic in this country. We have become much more consumption-oriented, consumerist.
You sound like a poster child for the daughters of the American Revolution.
You know what? It's true. It's true. On this issue, we have lost the ability to impose short-term pain for long-term gain.
Jamie's in my ear going, he must be a Red Sox fan. Let's look at this quote right here from the book, The Post-American World, Release 2. The U.S. should be thinking creatively. I love this. Asymmetrically. Fareed with a math score. This would allow it to capitalize on one of its key advantages. The United States has a much broader and deeper range of instruments than just its military. Our projection internationally, what else do we need to project besides our military?
Well, you think about it, you go to the Middle East, right? This is the place where we're bombing every country we can. We have 250,000 troops if you combine Afghanistan, Iraq, and all the others. And you go there, and what you discover is that's not winning us any hearts and minds. But you talk to people in the Middle East about what they feel about America, and they'll all tell you they want to send their kids here to college. They want to come here to. So if you were to think to yourself, well, what is our big attraction here? People like this country. They believe in it. They admire it. And yet our visa policies, our immigration policy is basically designed to stop people from coming here. If we were to think about tourism as the next potential growth industry and say to ourselves, how can we triple the number of tourists who come to this country and spend money? We'd have a completely different attitude towards immigration and visas. Right now, we make it as difficult for anyone to come to this country and spend money as is possible.
What are the quiet parts of your book? There are many contemporary echoes of Britain's dilemmas. We look at the British Empire and we say, is that us? You're arguably better qualified than anyone in this nation to talk about this. Is there an echo there? And how do we avoid not where the United Kingdom is today, but just that sense of ebbing away of the 20s? The King's speech captured it beautifully, I thought.
Here's the key. In 1910, any crisis anywhere in the world, everyone looked to London and said, what is Britain going to do? What is the Prime Minister going to do? And Britain got into that idea that every problem around the world they had to solve militarily, they had to deploy armies, they had to deploy navies. Meanwhile, they forgot that the core of British strength was not the fact that it could wage the Boer War in South Africa, it was its industrial might. And its industrial economic might was ebbing. Germany was overtaking it. The United States had already overtaken it. So I say when we think about American power, don't think about how many troops we have in Iraq and how many drone attacks we can wage in Pakistan. Those are consequences of economic power. The key is, are we still the world's most dynamic, innovative economy? That is the key to power.
We mentioned Western civilization. Let's go back to Huntington, who you studied under his classic work, The Clash of Civilizations. Where is the clash now? Which of the clashes globally are you most focused on? Is it China, U.S.?
I think by and large, the most significant threat we face, and I mean threat not as a military term, but as a challenge, is without question the rise of China. This is a once in a 200-300 year phenomenon. If you look back to Thucydides, the Peloponnesian War, this is the classic dynamic of rising new power and the established old power, and how are they going to kind of meet peacefully in this international space. Great.
Thank you so much for coming in. Fareed Zakaria, The Post-American World, Release number 2, substantially rewritten. Like if you read book 1, you could reread book 2 and get away with it.
It's like Hangover 2.
Hangover 2.
You've seen Hangover 1, you still have to.
It's like the Hangover 2 of foreign affairs. That's a quote from Fareed Zakaria.